change someone's mind? Well, that question is answered by the esteemed professor at the Wharton School. His name is Jonah Berger. He's very popular for writing the book Contagious, which talks about how to make your marketing go viral. And in his new book, The Catalyst, he's narrowing down to the question of how do you change someone's mind, which is an element of persuasion and influence. And one of the key concepts he's pushing is that persuading people or changing their minds has less to do with pushing them and more to do with reducing the barriers or the roadblocks that are holding them back changing the world. So he has this framework, and I'm going to walk through it with some examples, that is abbreviated as REDUCE. So reactance, endowment, distance, uncertainty, and corroborating evidence. So let's start with reactance. Now, one of the key concepts that he's talking about is that when you want to move something in the real world, like a chair, you push it, and the chair does not push back. So it does what you tell it or command it to do. Now, the problem with people is that there's a tendency for them to push back. And I would say that this is probably more true in countries where there's low power distance. So how do you deal with a situation where pushing is not effective in moving people in the direction you want to go? Well, what you do is you try to provide those people with a sense of agency where they believe that they are making the decision themselves as an individual. And there are various techniques that highly influential people and marketers do to make this happen. And one of those is giving options. So often what people do is they provide only one option. And that is, it could be, I need you to do this, or it could be something on a marketing website, like the only offer that you can take the company on is doing a demo. But when you provide choices, so for example, a salesperson who says, option A is $2,000, and you get this, this, and this, or option B is $5,000 and you get the benefits of X, Y, and Z. And perhaps there's even a third option. Option C, the premium version, is $11,000 and you get A, B, C, D, E, whatever. So by providing even just a narrow set of options, what you're doing is you're creating the sense that somebody has agency. They have a choice. You're actually controlling the situation. You are persuading them by deciding what is the consideration set. Okay, it's like going to a voting booth and you have some agency, but ultimately the people that are on the ballot have already been chosen by a different group of people. So you don't have full agency, but you have some limited amount of choice. And people are more likely to buy into your solution or whatever it is you're trying to convince them of when they feel like they played a part in creating the ultimate decision that was made, rather than just being served a solution on a silver platter. Okay, the second concept here is endowment. Now, this is one of the most well-established concepts in psychology in general, and it's very relevant to marketing psychology, and that is that people are stuck to the status quo and they really value what they already have. There's a lot of loss aversion, so people really don't like losing what they already own, and the amount that they suffer from losing something is much more than they gain from gaining something. So what you want to do when you're persuading people is rephrase things away from this is what you gain and more towards this is what you will lose if you do nothing, or you're going to gain back what you already lost. So you were maybe you lost $2 million. Well, we're going to help you recapture that. And perhaps if you do nothing now, well, you're going to lose another $500,000 next year, and then another $6,000 the year after that. So what we're going to do is we're going to prevent you from losing that money in the future. And it doesn't have to be money; it could be time. So for example, you're wasting a lot of time typing medical records every day. Well, if you start using our solution, you're going to regain that time back. You're going to have an extra 20 hours a week or something like that. Okay, the third element here is distance. So people tend to not value things when they're far in the future. So there's kind of an element of risk there, an element of uncertainty where it's like, well, okay, that could happen. We could yield those benefits, but there are a lot of things that could happen in the meantime. So one way that you bridge that barrier of distance preventing people from going in the direction you want is you ask for less. So you use incrementalism. So let's talk, instead of talking about what happens a year from now, let's talk about what happens a month from now. And then when a month goes by, okay, now let's talk about the quarter and then we can talk about the year. The fourth element here is uncertainty. So whenever people are trying something new, there's an element of uncertainty, there's an element of risk, there's an element of this is not tangible. This is a concept. Okay, maybe it'll be helpful in theory, but in the real world, when push comes to shove, when the rubber hits the road, what's actually going to happen? So we see this a lot in the software space. The way you overcome that is with things like free trials, with freemium solutions. And another thing that you can do is you reduce the upfront costs. So in the software industry, for example, you used to have to invest a lot of money to get the new software established. Now what we're seeing is companies are not charging for onboarding. Onboarding is free. The product, to some extent, is even offered for free to a limited set of features or to a usage-based restriction on how much they can use the product for free. So what you're doing is you're reducing the investment that's required and the switching costs that are required to dive in and try your product. And you see this in the grocery stores too. They'll have free samples. So when somebody believes that their product fundamentally tastes better, it is a higher quality, then what they'll do is they'll offer free samples in the grocery store. And then the uncertainty with trying something new is reduced. People are more confident in buying your product after having tried it. Now, corroborating evidence. This is where one of the key concepts in marketing comes into play, which is the idea that people are fundamentally social animals, and we're basically like sheep, and we prefer to do what other people have done. It increases our confidence, and it makes it more certain that this is the direction that we should go because other people are showing us that. And reinforcement, it could be people, it could be professionals, it could be further evidence. Social proof case studies are one of the most effective means of creating the kind of evidence that changes people's mind. The other thing to note is that when you're using this kind of evidence, when you concentrate them close in time, they have a higher impact. So for example, I was talking to a colleague of mine who did marketing to small, medium-sized businesses, and he did a number of different tests. What he found was that a frequency of around 6 during the campaign period, which is about 1 to 2 months long, was the sweet spot for convincing somebody to sign up for the product. So what is that showing? It's showing that it's not just how much evidence you have or how many case studies you have or how many people are talking about your solution. It's how dense is that information being received. So if 10 people are telling you to buy a product or vouching for a product within a 1 week span or within a 1 month span, then your mind is kind of tricking itself into thinking, oh, well, there's a super trend here. Everybody's on board with this. Now, maybe it's just 10 people, but there's a perception that there's a pattern there that can't be refuted. Whereas if you took those 10 case studies or 10 pieces of social proof and spread them out over a year, they have less of an impact. So this is a great framework for helping you change people's minds. I would say it's particularly effective when people are leaning towards a direction that is not yours. So maybe it's a competing product, or maybe it's just sticking with the status quo, which is one of the biggest challenges to overcome. If people have been doing something for a long time and they're in the habit of doing, they're going to be very resistant to trying something else unless you use some different elements to convince them, to persuade them that changing the status quo is worth the effort, worth the energy, worth the investment.